Good evening and welcome. Tonight I'm going to be reading to you from this History magazine article about the Valley of the Kings, Tombs of the Pharaohs. What's great about this article is that it's a more picture-oriented article. So we're actually going to look at the pictures after we read each segment. So let's start with this one. We have a big zoomed out look at this ancient site. You can see the tomb entrances along these hills and cliffs and all the various paths around. We're going to learn all about it. Let's dive right in. Let's read all this first. Ancient Egypt's most iconic structures are not its temples, but its tombs, from the towering pyramids at Giza to the subterranean chambers in the Valley of the Kings. Egypt's might rose and fell between the Old and New Kingdoms, and the resting places of its pharaohs followed suit. The pyramids at Giza were built during the Old Kingdom, which was between 2575 to 2150 BCE. During the 4th dynasty, pharaohs Khufu, Khafre, and Menkori built massive skyscraping tombs that combined drama with, at first, safe resting places for the pharaohs. But their sheer size undid their security over time. Tomb robbers were able to break in and loot them. 1,000 years later, the New Kingdom, which was between 1539 to 1075 BCE, arose, and Egypt enjoyed a period of great prosperity and power. The kings of the 18th, 19th, and 20th dynasties extended their might through military, diplomatic, and economic means. As wealth poured into Egypt, pharaohs could build greater monuments, temples, and tombs. While the pyramids might have been admired for their size and strength, the New Kingdom pharaohs recognized their insecurity. To protect their mummies, rulers now wanted tombs hidden away. Elaborate above-ground monuments were cast aside in favor of large underground tombs in a new royal necropolis. Underground community. There was already a tradition of burying people in tombs cut into the rock on the west bank of the Nile, and New Kingdom pharaohs chose to follow this practice. The new cemetery, known now as the Valley of the Kings, was formerly called the Great and Majestic Necropolis of the millions of years of the pharaoh life, strength, health in the west of Thebes. Towering over the site is a 1,500-foot mountain, El Qurn. Some Egyptologists believe that the peak's resemblance to a pyramid, a shape associated with the sun god Amun-Ra, led to the selection of this location. The valley's geography also added a benefit: security. A narrow gorge was the only way in or out. The exact identity of the first pharaohs buried in the Valley of the Kings is uncertain, but Thutmose I, the 18th dynasty's third pharaoh, was definitely one of them. More royals followed, including Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Tutankhamun, Seti I, and Ramses II, also known as Ramses the Great. Perhaps the largest tomb belongs to Ramses II's many sons and houses as many as 120 chambers and corridors. The Valley of the Kings fell into disuse around 1069 BCE. Power shifted to the north and it was abandoned. Visitors and discoveries. The tombs continued to attract visitors over the centuries, not only looters but also tourists. Ancient Greeks and Romans scratched graffiti on the walls, giving today's Egyptologists an idea of when tombs were accessible. In the 4th century CE, a community of Christians used some as monastic dwellings. Islam arrived in the 7th century, and the site received its modern name of Wadi al-Bab al-Muluk, or the Valley of the Gates of the Kings. In 1798, Napoleon's Egyptian campaign brought French scholars to the valley, and they fell in love with ancient Egypt. Italian archaeologist Giovanni Battista Belzoni discovered the tomb of Seti I and many others in the early 1800s. He famously declared there was nothing more to find, but he was quickly proven wrong. After 1827, to keep track of new finds, tombs began to have official designations, or KV numbers. KV stands for King's Valley, plus the number in the order of discovery from KV 21 onward. In the late 1800s, French Egyptologist Victor Loret discovered 17 tombs. Wealthy American Theodore M. Davis backed missions that found 34 more in the early 20th century. In 1922, the valley's only near-intact tomb to date, Tutankhamun's, was opened. In 1966, American Egyptologist Elizabeth Thomas published her groundbreaking scientific study of the Theban necropolis, laying the basis for the explorations that followed. In 1978, the Theban Mapping Project began a decades-long mission to map the Valley of the Kings, which it published in 2000. More than 60 burials have been found to date, and scholars believe more remain hidden in the Valley of the Kings. How exciting is that? There could be more. So there's a big map here of all the various tombs. I won't go over all of them. Why don't we find King Tut? King Tut is KV 62, and I know he was very awkwardly placed because he died so unexpectedly that his tomb was not ready for him. So they just kind of threw him in a little unfinished tomb. 68, I don't see it. I don't see it at all. Oh, I see it because it's not listed there. It's number 23. I should probably look more carefully. So he's right here. So you see there's the path and he's like just off to the side. He doesn't have an official walkway heading into his tomb. Number 2, way over here, that is Thutmose the Fourth. And number 1 is over here, that's Thutmose the First. They're way up high, way far away from the gorge. We also have some archaeologists here. That's Theodore Davis. He was the one that found 34 tombs. That's incredible. And what a mustache. Can you see that? Look at that handlebar there. And there's some hieroglyphs here. They're from Seti I's tomb. Let's read these little captions and then we'll look at the photos. Valley of the Sun. The wadi where the Valley of the Kings is located sits at the foot of a distinctly shaped mountain. Today it is known as El Qurn, which is Arabic for the horn, but the ancient Egyptians called it Ta Dahent, which means the peak. Observed from the entrance in the Valley of the Kings, the mountaintop looks remarkably like a pyramid, similar to the famous structures at Giza, built more than 1,000 years earlier to house pharaohs of the Old Kingdom. Ancient Egyptians associated this sacred geometry with the solar god Ra, who played a key role in the afterlife. The surrounding area was also sacred to the goddess Hathor and the Cobra goddess Merit Seker. Both deities were protectors of the dead and watched over those who were buried. The Valley of the Kings is located on the west bank of the Nile, across from the modern city of Luxor and the ancient site of Thebes. In Egyptian cosmology, transition to the afterlife is associated with the setting sun in the west, giving the site's location an important symbolic role. The site actually consists of 2 separate branches, one eastern, where most burials are located, and the other western. Because of the arid climate, the valley is prone to flash floods, which can cause debris to cascade into any open tombs, filling their chambers or blocking entrances. Located at a low spot in the valley, the interior of Ramses II's tomb, KV7, bears signs of repeated flooding, which damaged wall paintings and chambers. And here we can see Elkhorn here, which does very much look like a pyramid, doesn't it? It almost looks man-made, which is probably why they liked it so much. You can see the walkway here and even some tomb entrances along the pathway here in the valley. Worshipping the dead. In the Old Kingdom, pharaohs often had a funerary temple attached directly to their pyramids. These sites were dedicated exclusively to the funerary cult of a pharaoh. New Kingdom rulers also built mortuary temples, but they chose to separate them from their tombs. Like the Valley of the Kings, they were located on the western bank of the Nile, but they were closer to cultivated areas. Each new temple was incorporated into the beautiful Festival of the Valley, a major celebration of the harvest. During the festival, statues of Thebes' divine triad, Amun-Ra, his consort Mut, and his son Khonsu, would be brought to the temples to transmit their revitalizing power to the deceased. Mortuary temples served an important cosmic purpose by regenerating the deceased pharaoh's rule for eternity. Hence, each temple was known as a pharaoh's temple of millions of years. Among the grandest was the Ramesseum, built for Ramses II, who ruled Egypt for more than 6 decades. What remains of the complex today shows how the temples were used to commemorate important events from a pharaoh's reign. Ramses' many military victories, most notably the Battle of Kadesh, are celebrated in reliefs throughout the structure. One of the best preserved temples was also one of the first built. Hatshepsut's mortuary temple sits beneath the cliffs at Deir el-Bahri. So here we have a map of the whole entire complex. Let's go through it. Over here is the Valley of the Queens, where the queens and princes of the 19th and 20th dynasties were buried. Here's the funerary temple of Ramses III, the temple of Amenhotep III. Over here is the temple of Deir el-Medina and the village of Deir el-Medina, where the workers lived who built all of this. Here's the Ramesseum, the funerary temple for Ramses II. Over here is Thutmose III's temple. We have the temple of Mentuhotep, temple of Thutmose III, and the temple of Hatshepsut. And lastly, over here is the temple for Seti I. And then behind all of that is the Valley of the Kings. And up here is Elkhorn. So the actual tombs are way back here. I guess you gotta take this path and go to the Valley of the Kings. But here you can see the Nile, the lush farmlands, and the temples here facing it. And here's a picture of Hatshepsut's temple, which I actually did a History Magazine video about not too long ago, very strangely enough. I think it was one of my most recent ones about famous temples. Let's look at the next page. Adorning a royal tomb. To excavate and adorn the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, special corps of artisans and stonemasons formed a community in the village of Deir el-Medina. They were responsible for the excavation and decoration of the pharaohs' tombs. After a pharaoh died, the vizier would choose a suitable site for the next pharaoh's tomb so that work could commence. When Seti I came to power around 1290 BCE, work began on his royal tomb. I have an itch, hold on. There. Stonecutters from Deir el-Medina began excavating the tomb, carving out long corridors and multiple chambers in the limestone. As chambers were finished, artists began creating adornments. In the 18th dynasty, tombs often only featured painted murals, but after the reign of Horemheb, 1319 to 1292 BCE, many featured painted reliefs. These vibrant works were first carefully chiseled out of plaster-covered walls and then painted with pigments and natural binding agents, achieving a result that has remained practically intact for millennia. Seti I's tomb set a new standard for funerary art, with its walls and surfaces covered in color. Thousands of years later, Seti I's tomb would provide Egyptologists with one of the earliest, more complete sets of funerary texts. So here we have a little diagram of when Seti I's tomb was being decorated. So starting over here, we have creating the canvas. Stonemasons carefully chisel out the chamber's walls, leaving behind a uniform surface. Then here they're smoothing it out, the coat of plaster, to fill in any cracks or crevices. Then they're sketching them in, the early phases of the drawing. Then over here they're tracing the lines in heavy black pigment. Then they're sculpting the rock, carefully chiseling out the bas-relief by following the black lines. You can see over here they're adding the color. And like I said, that's Seti I's tomb. You can see this is the area that they're showing, and the long pathway that actually leads to the tomb entrance. It's incredible. And here we can see, this is in Horemheb, where I guess they didn't finish, or they were in the middle of a process here for some reason, and they were between the part where they sketched it out and when they chiseled it. So you can really see the process, you know. Look how long these beards are. Goodness. Let's see what's next. Dwellings for eternity. Even though the tombs in the Valley of the Kings all date to the New Kingdom, there are notable differences in their design. One of the easiest to spot is their location. During the 18th dynasty, entrances tended to be hidden from view, but as time went on, pharaohs were more comfortable with the entrances being on display. Ramses II featured a monumental face on the front of his tomb. For the rulers of the 20th dynasty, tomb entrances were plainly visible on the slope of the valley. In 1966, American Egyptologist Elizabeth Thomas dug deeper in her comprehensive study of the Theban necropolis, the first of its kind, to explore the different floor plans of the tombs. She found that many adhered to several layouts. Some followed a rectilinear course with a final 90-degree turn to the left, like Tutmos III in KV34. While others, like Ramses II in KV7, featured a 90-degree turn to the right. Under the influence of King Akhenaten and his cult of Aten, the solar disk, late 18th century tombs, like that of Horemheb in KV57, became almost completely linear, evoking the rays of the sun. Despite these differences, the tombs do share common traits throughout the New Kingdom, including an entrance, a corridor, and a funerary chamber that held the pharaoh's mummy. So let's see, we have the tomb of Tutmos III up here. So 1 is the entryway, 2 is the corridor, and 3 is the tomb. So we can see 1, 2, and then he has a sharp left. This is KV57, Tomb of Horemheb. Entrance, long corridor, and the tomb. His was very straight. And this is Ramses II, KV7. He had his big grand entrance that came down the corridor here. lots of little extra space there, and then a sharper right to his actual tomb and all the side chambers. Let's see, this is in the tomb of Thutmose III. It's really beautiful. Look at can you see the stars on the ceiling? Look at this. It's a starry sky. That's so beautiful. And of course, lots of cool painted pillars as well, but not super colorful. Maybe it's all faded, and you can see lots of it is just text. Sacred orientation. The tombs themselves were more than just resting places. They were also the conduits for the deceased to travel to Amduat, or afterlife. The chambers and the artworks adorning them were deliberately placed to facilitate this process. Often they aligned with the cardinal directions on the compass, but these alignments would change over time. During the 18th dynasty, the tomb's symbolic orientation aligned the main corridor in a north-south direction, with the entrance at the south and the funerary chamber at the north. This association was often symbolic and rarely lined up with the actual orientation of the tomb. To make the associations clear, the walls of the burial chamber would include 4 niches, each one containing a magic brick, specifying the cardinal direction that each wall represented. In the 19th dynasty, this orientation underwent a radical change, with the entrance now being eastern toward the sunrise, and the burial chamber being western where the sun sets. The Egyptians also painted the Amduat on the burial chamber's western walls. The tomb's decoration also aligned with this symbolic orientation. Near the entrance there is typically a sun-painted golden yellow, while next to the funerary chamber there is a crimson sun. Wow, like a rising and setting sun. This is from KV9, the tombs of Ramses V and VI, and it shows you the afterlife. The blue here is supposed to be the night sky, and you can see the boats going down the river of death. This guy's riding a snake. Just all the many steps you have to do to get to the afterlife. You know what? I'm gonna include a link down in the description of this great ASMR video I passed out to the other day. Content very similar to mine that describes the steps of the Egyptian afterlife and what the pharaohs had to go through as they descended to the next world. I'll include that for you guys. It's really great. Watch that after this one, okay? It's a really tiny channel. I love this picture, but let's read this first. Keeping the balance. Egyptian pharaohs were not meant to rest in peace when they entered the afterlife. In the New Kingdom, monarchs went on a journey after their death. Learn more about that. The artwork on their tomb walls often reflected each one's personal quest. Religious shifts during the New Kingdom, most notably during the reign of Akhenaten, were reflected in the pharaohs' tombs as different texts, scenes, and deities receiving emphasis. During the reign of the Ramesside kings of the 19th dynasty, burial chambers were often adorned with scenes from several different funerary texts that would chronicle the deceased pharaoh's progress through the 12 stages of the underworld, mirroring the sun god Amun-Ra's journey through the 12 hours of the night. In order to ensure that divine harmony is maintained, the pharaoh must pass through all 12 stages. Colorful scenes from the Book of Gates and the Amduat adorn the tomb of Seti I, showing the king communing with the gods, and overcoming challenges. Most crucial was defeating the serpent Apophis, the incarnation of evil, who was determined to halt Amun-Ra and prevent the sunrise. The successful completion of every stage was crucial to ensuring that divine balance was maintained, a new day would dawn, the cycle would continue. I wonder if after the funerary rites were finished, everyone nervously waited for the sunrise, And then when it did, they were like, oh, the Pharaoh did it. It completed the journey. But this is such a gorgeous wall here. We can see Nephthys up here. And we can see the boats they're traveling on the River of the Dead. And it says this is also Seti the First. All those beautiful carved, like just imagine all of those workers just painstakingly tracing all this artwork and then chiseling around it and then repainting it. My goodness, you can see Osiris over here. All kinds of deities all over the place here. Funeral for a pharaoh. Despite the wealth of knowledge about the pharaohs' tombs and their construction, researchers know relatively little about the funerals of royalty. The main source of information comes from the decoration of the tombs, and much of that is devoted to what happens to a pharaoh in the afterlife, but not before. Researchers have looked to the funerals of nobles and the wealthy to reconstruct what a pharaoh's funeral must have been like. Following mummification, the pharaoh's body would be taken to its tomb. A mural on the eastern wall of Tutankhamun's burial chamber shows such a procession. A group of 12 mourners dressed in white linen pull a sledge bearing the king's coffin to the Valley of the Kings. Another mural, this one on the burial chamber's north wall, takes place at the tomb. It shows Tut's successor, A, draped in a leopard skin. He stands before Tut's mummy, preparing to perform the opening of the mouth ceremony, an important ritual that consisted of 75 steps and was believed to restore the deceased pharaoh's senses in preparation for his journey in the afterlife. After the ceremony, the coffin was placed in the sarcophagus, grave goods were arranged, and the tomb was sealed. Next stop, eternity. So here we can see from Tut's tomb the only representation of a funeral of a pharaoh. You can see the mourners here pulling his sarcophagus along. I wonder, it says there's 2 of them are viziers. I wonder if that's the bald ones. We can see some more mourners here. This is in the tomb of Ramos. They all look very distressed. And then over here we see the opening of the mouth ceremony. You can see the new pharaoh here dressed in a leopard skin. And we can see, looks like some other deities here preparing the ceremony as well. I think that's the last picture. Yep, okay. So that is it for tonight. How fascinating is this article? I love it. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video to be relaxing and educational, be sure to subscribe for more. I have another video about Egypt tomorrow. I hope that you found this video to be relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a good night. Do some more